Let's talk sodomy. I thank you all for joining me. And as you can tell from the topic, we're going to be discussing something that isn't often talked about, let alone, I think, the theme of a live stream. And the reason I chose to do it is because people may have questions. And while I can easily just do a video and present what I think about sodomy, the history, practice, and pain, which is what we're going to be discussing, I'd rather hear from others as part of that discussion, because sodomy, which is often thought of as anal sex, but which, as we're going to see, involves something a little bit different. It certainly can and often does involve anal sex. But to start off this discussion, I wanted to give a brief history about sodomy and then talk about the practice and the pain, why there's pain involved, and then why, if there's pain involved, do people still practice sodomy or anal sex, the anal sex part of sodomy. So what is sodomy historically? Most people know that sodomy relates to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah from the Bible, the book of Genesis. I'm not going to read the story. This is mostly a religious channel or a biblical history discussion channel, but we also talk about movies, popular culture, and of course, at times, biblical texts and teachings cross over or are directly involved with social issues or beliefs, practices that people have. And sodomy is one of those. But it's one that doesn't get discussed much because it's one of those words that when you hear or when someone says, it's like, whoa, what do you mean by that? Or how far do you want to go with that? Because it's a word that involves a practice that can get very personal for many people. And so let me first explain the history of sodomy and where it comes from. So most of us are familiar with the biblical texts of Genesis that talk about Sodom and Gomorrah as two cities that were destroyed by Jehovah, the God we also call Jah. And the account is in Genesis 18 and 19. I'm not going to read it. I'll reference it. And of course, if anyone thinks I don't quote or reference the substance of the account accurately, just let me know or put your comments in the text. But so in Genesis 18 and 19, it gives the account of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, which were, and the remnants still are, in the region of what is today the Dead Sea. And the account also describes other cities. It talks about a city that Lot fled to, Zoar, and it describes the perspective of Abraham as well. And so the question we're involved in is how does that account relate to the practice of sodomy that we often hear about and that people still practice today? So Sodom was an ancient city described in the Bible, among other cities that were involved with practices that, according to the account, caused an outcry of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah because of the practices of the people of the city, some of which we'll read about. So the account where Jehovah and his angels are talking to Abraham and Jah's explaining what he's going to do. This was right after he told Abraham that Sarah at her advanced age would conceive a child. And then Abraham starts walking them out, and they're looking upon Sodom and Gomorrah, and then Jehovah starts to think about telling Abraham what he's going to do. Probably also, as the account goes on to explain, because his relative Lot is in Sodom. And so, in any case, according to the account, the outcry of the people rose so high that Jehovah wanted to go down there. Just like at the Tower of Babel, also a biblical account, post-flood, where Jehovah went down to see what they were doing in a very upfront and personal way and confused their languages. And from there, all excuse me, the language is spread about, which is verifiable historically, both in terms of the remnants of the Tower of Babel and the dispersion of peoples and the different languages, all datable to around that time. And so, with respect to Sodom, it was similar in that the Bible describes JahWah going down there to basically verify firsthand this outcry. So what's the outcry? What's sodomy? Well, as the account goes on to describe that JahWah's angels go into the city, and as they're at the gate, they see Lot, and Lot's right there, rushes out to greet them, and basically says, hey, welcome to the city, come in and stay at my place. And the angels say, no, we're going to just stay in your streetway or your roadway. At that time, the roadway was basically the marketplace, the roadway leading into the city where they would have various marketplaces and shops and people, and I'm sure also residences. And so the angels tell Lot this, no thanks. But before this, JahWah and the angels had a conversation with Abraham about whether there were any righteous people in the city. And it was about whether JahWah would destroy the city. Abraham started with 50 people and ultimately came down to 10. And JahWah said, if there's 10 righteous people in the city, I will not destroy it. And so, but it didn't involve whether he would save any righteous people. For example, he ends up saving Lot and his 2 daughters, 3 people. But others had a chance. The sons, Lot's sons-in-laws who had married his daughters, but they thought he was just joking. If you read the account, they thought he was, just crazy, like most people probably would, unless they were prepared to listen to their father. So, in any case, they chose not to, and even Lot and his daughters, the morning of the whole destruction, according to the account, it says they hesitated, that the angels actually had to take them out because it was just so overwhelming. But JahWah's mercy, according to the account, this is what it says, allowed the angels to physically remove them from the city, including Lot's wife. But then they all were told not to look back and to keep going. And they even gave Lot an adjustment according to how far away he should go. They told him at first to go to the faraway mountains, but then he has to go to what became known as the city of Zohar, because he didn't think he could make it, basically. And so JahWah took mercy upon his weak willpower at that moment and dealing with all these things and the others with him. And so that's the account involving Lot. But before that, I'm just kind of bringing this up to give you some context. Before this, so Lot's there at the gate. He meets them, greets them, offers them to come in. They say no. They want to stay in the city street because they're there. Remember, they're there to see if there's even 10 people, according to the account, who are righteous in order to spare the city, even if all the others were sinning greatly, as the account says, heavily against JahWah. So what was the sin? What's sodomy? Well, the account goes on to explain that the angels, Lot was so zealous for the angels to stay with him. See, he's being hospitable. He's actually showing the angels, and you can tell this in the account, that there are some people in the city that would be worth saving it if they find what JahWah said. 10 of the whole city, or individuals who were righteous, like Lot. So, but they wanted to see more of what was going on in the street and in the market among the people. But because of Lot's insistence, they went in with him. He had them rest, gave them food. And it says, just as they were laying down for the evening, the people of the city from all the districts surrounded the house, from young to old, encircled it. And they called out to Lot and told him, send us out the men who came into you so we can get to know them, which was an ancient way of saying, have sexual relations. We know that, especially in this account, because the account goes on to say that Lot, upon hearing this, that they wanted his guests, the people he took in under his roof, which of course at that time, and in many cultures today, when you bring in guests, travelers, you're basically responsible for them. And so he knew the people of the city. In the account, that's why Lot forced them. It says Lot urged them strongly not to go and stay in the street. He knew the people of the street. So they went in with Lot's house. The people of the city encircled the house because they knew that they had come in. They'd received word or seen them. Other people, obviously, at the gate were coming and going. And so Lot goes outside. It says he opens the door and goes out on the porch to talk to all the Sodomites. And he says, listen, these people came into my house, under my roof. Don't do anything evil to them. I have 2 daughters. They've not known a man. I'll give them to you, and you can do with them as you would, like they wanted to these men. So the context is all sexual. We know that because he offers his daughters. And a lot of people today will say, in criticizing this account, well, you're, against sodomy, but here Lot's offering 2 daughters for the Sodomites to rape. But it wasn't rape. They were his daughters. And in that culture, and in many ancient cultures, and in many cultures today, fathers can give their daughters away. That's not rape. Anyone who uses this account to try to claim that it supports rape is a liar and is either ignorant and lying because they've heard something that's wrong, or they know the account and they're lying anyway because they don't want you to know what's going on. It's very clear historically and culturally, Lot was their father and he had authority to give them to other men. And it says it was the men of the city, not the women of the city. Andres is the Greek word. I looked in both the Greek and Hebrew. So, and I believe the Hebrew is enosh. So both terms refer to the males of the city, the young and the old, encircling the house and calling out for these people. These were not just people practicing what we're going to define as sodomy in just a minute. It's coming. This whole preface is to define historically sodomy. They were in the city of Sodom, Genesis 18:19. The angels have come into the city. Lot greets them, keeps them from the marketplace, doesn't want them to go into the city, urges them to come in with him. They do. And after they do, and after they eat, the men of Sodom come and encircle the city and call out for the men. Lot goes out on the porch, closes the door behind him and says, hey, don't do it. I have 2 daughters. Culturally and historically, I can give them to you. Don't abuse these men. And then they say, hey, listen, you're just a journeyer. You came in and journeyed into our city, and now you're judging us. We're going to do worse to you than to the men in your house. And then it says they pressed on Lot and the door, and then the angels reached out and grabbed Lot, blinded the Sodomites, and then told him, get your family, your friends, anyone whom you know that's righteous in the city, and bring them. The city is going to be destroyed. Okay, so we're going to stop there as far as the historical biblical account, because we've talked enough about the account to define sodomy. You'll notice nowhere in my referencing or description or anywhere in the actual account does it mention anal sex. That's implied, you could say, because of the males in Sodom seeking the males that came to Lot, and then ultimately Lot himself in a worse way. So, sodomy at its base, foundationally, historically and biblically, according to Genesis 18:19, is the same gender attracted to the same gender. I should say one gender attracted to the same gender. So males attracted to or attempting to in some way sexually dominate or be with other males. We could maybe by extension say females, but again, at its core, foundationally, historically, the text refers to the males of the city, encircling the house and calling for the males out of Lot's house, and then Lot giving them or offering them his daughters in their place, because that tells us what he knew they wanted. And that's why it's not rape. It's a culturally, historically definable tradition that at that time we can see was often done. And you can read about being done in the Bible at different times, even when it comes to people like Moses. So so sodomy at its core is attraction to the same gender. That's all the text really tells us. But when you're attracted to the same gender, you naturally are going to have affection, right? You're going to want to be involved. You're going to want to have sex in ways that lead to, in the case of males on males, anal sex, unless you just decide not to do it. But that's what commonly is done and what it leads to. So we're defining sodomy historically and culturally, biblically, as it pertains to the events involving Lot, Abraham to some extent, and the people of Sodom and the angels who visited them. And in the account, I believe it really can only be used to show attraction of males to other males. We could say in a harmful way, because it does seem very clear that that's what they were. They themselves say they're going to do worse to Lot than they're going to do to them. That implies it was going to be bad, right? Because if it's worse, that by implication means that the thing that isn't worse is still bad. Otherwise, how worse could worse be, right? So there are things we can draw from the account that aren't stated explicitly, but that are clear from what is stated explicitly. Nevertheless, we don't have to use this account to prove that sodomy is anal sex. We only need to read what the account says, which is that males were attracted to males in an abusive way, and that's what leads to and what is anal sex, as I'm going to show. Now, there are other things that people use anal sex for, like with Aleister Crowley and sex magic, which predates Aleister Crowley to other groups, of course. And then you have tantric yoga and or sex magic, things that involve the illumination of the chakras. I believe the root chakra in the case of sodomy, or using the anus for sex, and because it's all part of being one with your body in a sort of a carnal or earthy way, that they just see in a different spiritual light. I'm looking at this in terms of whether it's abuse, physically, spiritually, emotionally. It's not so easy to show abuse spiritually. It's easier to show abuse emotionally than spiritually. But it's very easy to show abuse physically. And with anal sex, it doesn't matter if you're using it to try to enlighten your chakras or to avoid having children or for any other reason. The anus is an organ, just like the other organs in our body. And I'm going to do my best to use sensitive language here. But again, we're talking about anal sex, sodomy, which is attraction between males in a sexually abusive way that appears to be based on the account involving Lot and Genesis 18 and 19. So how is it abusive by design? Well, let me share with you an article that explains some of the things that can happen with regular anal sex. So anal sex, first of all, the anus by design only has muscles, the sphincter, inner and outer sphincter. These are all things you can look up. You can look them up now. We'll talk about it, or later. I'll put links in the description below. But you should know your anus. Not the planet, but I mean, and it's sensitive. I know you hear these words, sodomy, anus. If we don't talk about it, we're allowing the other side, and by other side I mean sodomists. Not that they're the enemy all the time, but I'm talking about the people who practice what non-sodomists don't practice. We're non-sodomists for a reason, right? I mean, most people do not practice sodomy. Most people are not homosexual. Why? Are just most people not interested in another way to have sex? No, it's because it's painful, it's bad for you, and it causes damage to your body and to your mind. And that's where I argue also your emotional and spiritual state. But the anus doesn't have muscles like the vagina that allow for for example, the male reproductive organ to come inside and be lubricated naturally by the vagina. The anus doesn't have that kind of lubrication system. It has fecal matter and toxic human waste that, that's supposed to come out. That's what the sphincter does. It brings it out as the lower part of the intestine. Everything is supposed to move. Things that you eat and consume through your body so that all the things that are usable are absorbed and used. The things that are not or that are excessive are removed. And that's the waste that Jah made to be perfectly designed and removed, contained within our body until that point. And then it can be used as fertilizer and other things in the planet. It's not meant to be a lubricant. It, in fact, can, if used that way, tear the anal wall, which is very thin. It's almost a guarantee that you're going to have bleeding. Even pro-anal sex sites, I looked some up. I wanted to get all perspectives, and none of them denied that these are some of the problems you need to take care of. They advise excessive lubrication and, not to get panicked over bleeding. Bleeding? You're not supposed to be bleeding down there. And you're not supposed to be bleeding during sex. Unless, it's your first time as a woman, or, sometimes monthly things can get in the way, or you're not sure and things happen. You start early. But then you don't keep having sex during that time, right? Because it's viewed as unclean. There are things being removed from the woman that aren't healthy to be having sexual bodily fluid exchanges during. And so that's why the Bible says to abstain during that time until, the woman is ready again, or there are other conditions that people need to meet. But let me share with you some more information about anal sex. Okay, so the design itself leads to tearing. It involves toxic human waste. And at the point of climax, if you are having anal sex, you're going to, as a man, ejaculate into the anus, which is likely torn. Now you have fecal matter, human waste, and blood. Fecal matter, human waste, blood, and semen. So, these things, I start thinking and saying them, and I'm like, what am I doing? But I knew I wanted to talk about this, because if we act like we can't talk about it in a way that's somewhat normal, and it really is normal, that's our body. These are the things that they're teaching our kids in ways that are more illustrative, right? By movies and in songs and all this stuff. So if we don't at least prepare ourselves for a conversation, well, then we're going to lose a lot of people to anal sex until they figure out the damage is done. Now, one of those problems, it's not just, so when you have the blood involved, anytime you have blood involved, tearing, you have arteries and veins also, and we'll talk about some of the other things people bring up, and I had comments in my chat there, and you're welcome to join it, about the prostate and its use in stimulation. So you have the pelvic nerve, but this is a nerve that runs from your pelvic area and spine throughout your pelvic region. It's not by design meant to be tapped or stimulated through the anus, and neither is the prostate. The fact that they're so sensitive, right? The prostate, because of its involvement with urine and the semen fluid that protects male sperm, as men, okay, I'm talking to men now, those areas are very sensitive, whether they're in urination or in sexual ejaculation. There are a number of sensitivities that take place that allow us to differentiate those functions and manage them accordingly. So just because there are all of these sensitive spots and organs and nerves, right? You touch any nerve, you're going to feel that. But the prostate's a very sensitive organ. So what? So you can stimulate the prostate and have an exaggerated orgasm potentially. If that's what you want, if your goal, I guess if your goal, and my goal here is not to make male attraction to males or sodomy or even prostate stimulation like something that that I'm not trying to deprive you of your choice, right? Whether it's criminalized or not, I don't think there's any good reason for sodomy in the anal sex way, but I think sodomy as it's defined historically, male attraction to male, that's a different story. It certainly leads to anal sex and other abuses. It's not a healthy relationship, but in our country, the United States and others, it's allowed in large part. Sodomy laws differ, and that's defined often with respect to anal sex, you see, which is why I started out that way, just to show the true historical description of sodomy and then what it's come to mean today. So I don't see the arguments that just because you can get a bigger orgasm through the anus if you stimulate the prostate or the pelvic nerve is a good reason to tear open your anus and thereby increase the chance of HIV and immunosuppression and HPV, human papilloma virus, I believe it's called. And so that's what leads to anal cancer, and that's what I want to show you. So let's take a look at a couple things from this article here. From the American Society of Colon and Rectal Surgeons. I'll show this here for you guys. Let's take a look at it. So here you can see, let me get the whole shot in there for you. Let's take a look at just part of this together. I'm going to start right here, and I'm not going to read everything, and I'll kind of give you an indication of where I'm at with a little highlighting. But let's take a look at this together real briefly, and then let's talk about it. It says the anal canal is a short tube surrounded by muscle at the end of your rectum. The rectum is the bottom section of your colon, large intestine. When you have a bowel movement, stool leaves your body from the rectum through the anal canal. Cancer begins when some of the body's cells divide without stopping. As the cancer grows, it may stay in nearby tissues or spread to other parts of the body, a process called metastasis. Anal cancer starts in the cells around or just inside the anal opening, right where if you look over at the illustration here, the penetration would be if you're simulating sex using the anus. So anal cancer starts in the cells around or just inside the anal opening. A person may be diagnosed with precancerous cells in the anal area. With time, these cells may have a high chance of becoming cancerous. While this condition is treated differently than anal cancer, it is the reason to get treatment early. Okay, so back to anal cancer. Now, let's look at the risk factors briefly. This will be the last section of this article that I'm going to read, and then we're going to talk about it. Okay, so risk factors. A risk factor increases your chance of getting a disease. The most common risk factor for anal cancer is being infected with the human papilloma virus, HPV. HPV is a sexually transmitted virus that may also cause warts in and around the anus or genitals in both men and women, but anal cancer can occur without the presence of warts. Other risk factors include, these are risk factors. You're not going to see as one of the risk factors heterosexual sex, that is vaginal, penile sex. But you are going to see, among other things, anal sex. Age 55 and older. So, gentlemen, pay attention. Anal sex, number 2. Sexually transmitted diseases, which happen more often than any other way through anal sex because of the tearing and exposure to blood, fecal matter, all this stuff. Multiple sexual partners. So you want to try to pick someone, be faithful to that person, and just get used to being content. But when you're trying to find the greatest orgasm ever, and you're searching for prostates through the anus, or you go looking for the pelvic nerve, you're really putting a lot into the orgasm, right? How much damage do you want to pursue and cause just to have a temporary sensation beyond what we're really meant to experience, right? If it was so much a part of what we were designed to experience, it wouldn't be that hard, and it wouldn't involve so much damage. Normal sex doesn't involve damage. It leads to a child, which is how we survive as a species. And you can't do that through anal sex. All right, let's get back to the risks. History of HPV, okay. I'll put a link to this in the description as well. Weakened immune system, that happens also from anal sex, because when you ejaculate into an anus, the body responds. It's like, you can look this up, and I will put a link down specific to that issue. The body starts to shut down in different ways, and one of those is by suppressing your immune system. And then another risk factor, chronic inflamed areas that cause long-term redness or irritation. When you have anal sex, you're going to have problems because that doesn't have the right lubrication. It has fecal matter that isn't meant for lubrication. And even if you try to prepare the area in different ways, as sodomites or analists, whatever you want to call them, will do, those who practice anal sex, it still doesn't have the proper lubrication for the cell wall thickness of the anus. And the sphincter muscle isn't designed to receive that kind of repeated trauma. It's traumatic. And we're going to talk about in a minute that trauma is used by many people today who practice anal sex for mind control. And that's why Aleister Crowley and others were using it, not only to try to get as great a personal sensation as they could, but to also try to dominate and control other people. Okay, so inflamed areas such as anal fistulas or open wounds in the anal area. These are risk factors for anal cancer or HPV, being infected by it, which leads to anal cancer. And then prior pelvic radiation therapy for various causes. So although last sentence, although few cancers are totally preventable, avoiding risk factors and getting regular checkups are important. So what is this saying? Avoiding risk factors. That means avoiding anal sex. That means avoiding sexually transmitted diseases, avoiding multiple sex partners, avoiding chronically inflamed areas. I'm highlighting the ones that pertain to the sodomy involving anal sex that we're discussing. We can get into these other things for different reasons, but then we would get off topic. So if you want to reduce your chances for anal cancer, I mean, it's no secret that anal sex, the sodomy that involves anal sex, is going to dramatically increase your risk for anal cancer and also cause you other problems because you're damaging the area that is supposed to be removing toxins and waste from your body. So it's very important that we consider these things and that we think about how we can best help each other. I mean, because if we're talking about ways that we can improve our society and culture and reproduce our species, and in our case, try to give some glory and respect to God. But that aside, it's not really even a question at this point of God, though I think our design and the way we were made to have sex and the way we were made to excrete toxic waste, everything really leads to only one conclusion. But that's not what this show's about. I wanted to talk about sodomy. I wanted to define sodomy in relation to the biblical text to show what it is really. And that is, at its base, foundationally, it is attraction in an abusive or perverse way between males. Because that's what the sodomites were doing in that account. And what they were prepared to do, not only to the angels that visited Lot, but to Lot himself, whom they had let stay temporarily as a journeyer, it says. But, it didn't take much for them to view him as an opportunity as well. And it's not just the attraction. It's not just what the attraction leads to, the sodomy, anal sex. It was their attempt to force Lot and his guests to have relations with them. They weren't just asking them, "Hey, Lot, can you send those people out? They look really handsome and I'd like to meet them," whatever. If they were homosexual, they weren't even acting like just normal people is my point. There are homosexuals today, people who practice sodomy in the anal sex way. They're nice people from my interaction. Not all of them, just like not all heteros are nice, but I don't. That still doesn't mean I'm going to hang out with them, right? I mean, I want to be around people who have similar values and interests that I do, but I get along with sodomites or those who practice anal sex or those who are attracted to the same gender all the time. And I treat them the exact same way I would want to be treated. But that doesn't mean I think sodomy, either the males attracted to males or what it leads to, anal sex, is right. Obviously I don't. I'm not a sodomite. I don't practice anal sex. And I'm not talking about, you got weak one time, maybe you missed or slipped or a onesie. Hey, things happen, right? Sometimes you may get curious or try new things and then you realize that was a mistake. I'm not talking about that. We all do things that we think about and think, okay, that wasn't good. I shouldn't have done that. That's not what the Sodomites were. The Sodomites were a committed group of people who wanted to abuse other people of the same gender against their will. Sodomy, biblically, historically, and according to Genesis 18:19, is when males attempt to abuse other males sexually against their will. And so, but there are other things that are implied with that involvement. And of course, anal sex is often one of them. But sometimes people will bring up sodomy as involving oral sex and things. That's not implied by this account. What is implied is what is directly stated, I should say, is that males were attracted to males in an abusive way that the males they were attracted to didn't agree with. And what's implied by that attraction, that abusive attraction, are things like anal sex. Sodomy, that's what it's come to mean. So there's actually a more historical original meaning than anal sex, and that is the attraction between males, specifically the attraction by males toward other males when the males who are the object do not return that attraction, and yet the attracted males continue to abusively engage them. That is sodomy. And, now that we've defined it historically and we've talked about it as a practice and all the pain that comes with it, regardless of what you think the act is, I think we're justified in asking, why sodomy?